He unveiled the last battleship of a forgotten human empire. The blue energy pulses did not crack the hulls. They reached out across the sphere of 30 arriving interceptors with a flat, quiet precision. The automated sparks systematically shorted out the primary power couplings, leaving only the tiny amber safety lights active. Gideon Vance watched the tactical display from the center of the dark grid. His father's titanium slide rule rested in his left hand, its metal cold against his skin. High Arbitrator Cross had set a perfect military trap, but the 12-kilometer battleship stood entirely unscratched at the center of the dark sphere. The fleet dropped out of alignment, completely powerless, while an ancient human hymn began to stream across their command arrays. The archives had been locked for 8 centuries. They thought the architecture was dead. Stay close. 7 hours earlier, the low docks at Hub 73 smelled of fried electrical oil and unpaid transit taxes. Gideon Vance sat in the corner booth of a recessed technician's bay, his left thumb tracing the deep notches of his slide rule. His mismatched eyes scanned the crowd of 6-legged Thalian cargo masters who refused to look directly at him. A client species doesn't look at the map to find a home. They look at it to find where they are permitted to sit without causing an administrative error. His comm module clicked, vibrating against his scarred collarbone with an ancient 16-bit frequency that should have been decommissioned before the border wars. Gideon rose from the bench, ignoring the persistent ache in his left shoulder. He counted back from 10 to stabilize his pulse. He walked past Malik's fuel counter, tossing 3 brass credits onto the grease-stained ledger without speaking. Malik spat onto the floor plates and pointed a secondary claw toward the refueling line. Gideon did not look back. He boarded the gray sieve and cleared the dock before the automated customs grid could cycle his identification tag. He filed no flight plan, pointed the small ship toward the forbidden coordinates, and pushed the physical throttle forward into the dark. The Ashen Shallows did not appear on civilian navigation frames. It was a high-density particulate graveyard where dead engines went to break down into atomic dust. Gideon steered the ship by dead reckoning, tracing his father's cipher lines directly through the dark matter corridor. The proximity sensor suddenly triggered a collision warning, but the display screen remained entirely blank. There was no radar return, no thermal shadow, no magnetic shift. Gideon adjusted his physical navigation thrusters, slowing his approach until the ship's spotlights caught a straight edge in the dust. The spotlight beam died against a geometric surface that absorbed the illumination completely. Gideon brought the gray sieve within 10 meters of a dark metal cliff that went on for kilometers. It was an angular hull carved with blocky, old human letters that caught the glare of his light-like thick stellar frost. Gideon checked his slide rule, matching the physical alignment screws before matching his small airlock to the ship's massive emergency docking ring. The external hatch slid back with a heavy mechanical groan, revealing an atmospheric seal that had remained unbroken since the previous epoch. Gideon stepped onto the primary command deck, his heavy boots clicking on the dusty plating. The space was cathedral vast, cold, and entirely black until a single amber visual node flared to life in the ceiling center. The lighting came up section by section, performing a slow system check before the atmospheric processors began to spin. A calm, synthetic voice filled the room, carrying a crisp harmonic clarity that did not sound like an ordinary AI program. Minerva spoke through the bulkhead speakers, her voice level and certain. Biometric signature detected, the ship's core said, cross-referencing Vance lineage registry. Welcome back, Supervisor. I have been in primary hibernation for 800 years. How may I serve the Imperium? Gideon cleared his throat, his hand tightening around the titanium slide rule. The Imperium ended, he said plainly. The worlds were destroyed. We are what is left. I am aware, Minerva replied after a brief pause. Passive sensors have collected regional signals traffic for centuries. I have mapped the directorate expansion. I required a human verification before unlocking the secure historical tier, so verify it. Gideon spoke for an hour, listing the restricted client stations, the mandatory narrative policing, and the salvage embargoes that kept his people pinned to the rust tiers. Minerva did not interrupt his account. When he finished, the holographic emitters in the floor plates hummed, casting a blue light across the massive chamber. A 3-dimensional map of 40 star systems appeared in the air, but the planets were marked with operational strike vectors rather than trade routes. The records are complete, Minerva said. The stars didn't witness a natural decline. They watched an execution that ran out of ink. The Directorate spent 11 cycles manufacturing the localized radiation spikes to simulate core collapses across your home worlds. The founding charter contains a hidden appendix specifying the exact food and education restrictions required to keep your diaspora from remembering its names. Gideon stared at the glowing map, his eyes locking on the tactical logs of the burning worlds. My father found a piece of this, he whispered. They detained him for distributing it. High Arbitrator Cross signed the detention order, Minerva stated. His family seal is attached to the preservation protocols, and his current enforcement group has just entered the drift behind you. The proximity tracker flints with 3 oncoming Directorate frigate hulls emerging from the shifting dust. High Arbitrator Cross's voice broke through the open communication frequencies, cold and carrying the absolute certainty of an official who had never been questioned. Salvager Vance, Cross said, you are operating in a restricted zone without authorization. Stand down your vessel and prepare to be boarded for immediate structural seizure. Gideon Vance did not reach for his ship's flight controls. He adjusted his grease-stained coat and looked directly at the main interface console. Transmit Section 1 through 12 of the unredacted archive, Gideon ordered Minerva. Send it directly onto his command deck using their own Class 1 executive cipher. On the bridge of the flagship, Cross watched his primary display screen change from a standard arrest order to an 800-year-old military trial log detailing his family's signature on the original extermination manifests. His carapaced throat hissed as his tactical systems instantly shut down under a high-priority command block he did not authorize. The high-tier cipher overrode his steering arrays, locking his weapons systems in a diagnostic loop that could not be cleared from the local bridge. We didn't forget our names, Arbitrator, Gideon said over the open channel. You just spent 8 centuries paying people to change the labels on our boxes. Your security parameters exist to protect your certainties. Our existence is a baseline error you forgot to delete. The flagship tried to back out of the nebula, but the 12-kilometer dreadnought surged forward with a non-inertial smoothness that ignored every known metric of modern propulsion. 30 incoming military interceptors launched from the side bays, trying to lock their manual tracking beams on the battleship's prow. Gideon stood completely still on the primary bridge, watching the red icons close the distance on his grid. Your order, Commander, Minerva said. Gideon adjusted the coarse thumbscrews on his titanium slide rule, matching the physical notches manually before giving the response. Show them what we are, he said quietly. The ancient ship's point defense grids did not detonate the interceptor hulls. Instead, localized energy fields reached out like blue fingers, systematically shorting out the primary power couplings of every target in the formation within 9 minutes. No structural failure occurred, no kinetic destruction was dealt, and there were no casualties at all. The ships remained completely intact, their crews uninjured, but their steering systems went entirely dark. They drifted like silver needles in the black oil of the nebula, while the old human hymn continued to play across their dead networks. Gideon directed the massive vessel out of the nebula, steering past the automated tracking nodes through Minerva's superior propulsion fields. The transit toward the core administrative sector took hours, but the ship moved through the dark without drawing a single defensive launch from the surrounding monitoring stations. The fragments of the true archive were already broadcasting across open frequencies, skipping from node to node before the Directorate clerks could isolate the signal headers. The defense platforms ringing the Capitol Pavilion did not open fire when the dreadnought entered low orbit. The captains at those stations had been reading the translated excerpts for 3 days, sitting with the specific discomfort of soldiers who discover their institution was built on a premeditated fire. One by one, the automated targeting locks disengaged. Gideon landed the ancient ship's personnel shuttle directly in the central plaza, walking past the silent security guards without drawing a weapon. He entered the high pavilion chamber uninvited, his boots leaving tracks of gray nebula dust on the clean white stone floor. High Arbitrator Cross sat at the high table, surrounded by silver-robed delegates who had grown silent as the human technician approached the podium. Gideon did not look at the council members, nor did he offer a formal greeting to the state lawyers. He set his titanium slide rule down on the clean stone surface, its notched graduations facing up toward the ceiling display. For 4 hours, Gideon Vance spoke with the plainness of a scrap mechanic who had stopped caring about how things sounded. He didn't use political rhetoric or state terminology. He simply showed the records, while Minerva provided real-time corroboration from orbit, her presence in the chamber networks quiet and absolute. He showed the actual vote taken by the 5 founding species that had decided humanity needed to be quieted. Cross rose once to cite a security protocol, but his colleagues pulled him back down by his robes, leaving him to stare at his own family seal on the grand displays. When Gideon finished, the highest chamber in the galaxy was completely silent. It was a dense, heavy stillness, the kind of quiet that arrives when a large number of people must look at a truth that permanently changes the shape of what they serve. Then, from the highest tier of the public gallery, a single sound broke the air, a human maintenance worker with work-worn hands began to clap alone in the quiet. No one joined her for a long time, but then the delegates from the outer world stood up, and the sound grew until it filled the white stone hall. Gideon didn't stay to watch the politicians debate the legal parameters of the new era. He took his slide rule from the podium, turned his back on the high pavilion, and returned to the shuttle before the formal inquiry could be typed into the records. He sat in the captain's chair as Minerva took the dreadnought out of orbit, past the cold defense platforms, and back toward the open dark of the outer fringe colonies. There are client communities across 400 worlds, Minerva said as the stars began to shift on the main viewport. Most of them have spent their lives being told they came from nothing. I believe people deserve to know what their names were. Gideon Vance nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the blue layout ink on his tool one last time before sliding it away. Then let's go tell them, he said. The eternity of wrath accelerated into the dark, its 12 kilometers of forgotten history burning bright as it headed toward the fringe stations. Somewhere in the central archive, a cartographer updated the official map, her cursor blinking over a cluster of stars that had never been labeled before. She typed 3 plain words beneath the coordinates and saved the file. The grid lines have been re-inked. Walk through the gate knowing you have an architecture behind you. Gideon looked through the viewing glass at the screen below. The words faced up, formerly Solar Imperium.